Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Dennis Mattern with CreativeOne here. So happy that you are joining us. We're going to talk about a pretty big topic that is on everybody's mind, and that is the Department of Labor Fiduciary Rule, what you need to know now. But before we dive into a very meaty subject, I do want to take care of a couple housekeeping items. And first off, if you look to the bottom right corner of your screen, you're going to see a chat box. Little chat button. It's kind of robin's egg blue, and it is in your bottom right corner. If you click on that, we will be taking some questions. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A at the end. We'll be mindful of everybody's time today, though, but we will do a little Q&A. But the chat, I do want to tell you two things. Chat is public. If you type something in there, everybody's going to see it. If you type something in the Q&A, only I, as presenter, will see that. I will be your proxy. I will ask that question for you. Also, hello, hi, Brandon Baxter. Good to have you in here right there. Also, we are recording so that you can go back and review any of the content that we're talking about. Fact check myself, fact checked Andrew here in just a second. But we will do that. So with that being said, it is time now to dive into a topic that, we've all been watching for a very long time. That is the DOL Fiduciary Rule. What you need to know now is what we're going to talk about. Now, I keep saying we. And first, I want to introduce Andrew Payne, VP and General Counsel here at CreativeOne. Andrew, welcome.
Good to be here, Dennis.
Fantastic to have you here. My name is Dennis Mattern, VP of Market Development here at CreativeOne. Just a word about CreativeOne. I see a lot of folks that are on here that you may not be familiar with us. CreativeOne, we are a 40-year-old top shelf IMO, independent marketing organization located in Kansas City. We develop product. We help advisors select product. We own a broker dealer. We own a corporate RIA. We have our own in-house ad agency. We also advocate for the sale and the continuation of offering advice to clients. Did I catch it all, Andrew?
I think that's right. It's good.
All right, hot dog. Okay, so our purpose today though, we've been watching this for years, and our purpose today, help independent insurance agents, independent advisors navigate the sale of fixed and indexed annuities pursuant to, doggone it, that new rule.
That's right, Dennis. And so a couple of things we want to focus on is really this is geared towards independent agents and independent agents in this independent space. And so we're not going to be talking about litigation prospects. We're not going to be talking about the merits of the rule, and we're not going to be talking about the carrier perspective or the institutional perspective or plan provider perspective. But we really want to focus on today, and each of those topics that I just talked about are our webinars in themselves. But we're going to talk about today is that we've got this new rule out. Let's dissect what it means for the independent agent and how a compliance process will work when this goes into effect. And so we're really going to focus on those elements. It is going to be a little bit of a lift. It's going to be some hurdles we have to jump over, but with everybody working together, the carriers, IMOs, and the agents, we can get through this. So that's our real purpose today. So if you're coming in for hot takes on what the rule is and how bad it is or how good it is, you're not going to get that here. We're really going to focus on compliance and pathways forward.
I'm going to paraphrase that. So we are just looking at the facts, and we are just looking at, hey, whatever this is the rule, this is what we have to do to make sure that we stay in business. Andrew, before we go forward and talk about what's coming, I need you to take us through the history.
Okay, so there's a long history, Dennis, and I'm going to try to do it very, very quickly because we don't want to bore people with what's happened in the past. We want to talk about what's going on now in the present, but it may be beneficial to just go over it. So I'm going to try to keep it to 60 seconds. If I go over,
I've got my watch.
Don't hold me to it, but I'm going to try to do it in 60 seconds. Okay, here we go. There were early efforts to federally regulate FIA sales. If you look to FINRA 0550 and SEC 151A, but we're going to start with the Department of Labor in 2010, which is when they first proposed a fiduciary rule. This rule in 2010 was widely criticized by members of both parties in Congress, and the department really took the unusual step. They never do this. They withdrew the rule, went back to the drawing board. We saw a new proposal in April of 2015. Mixed reaction on this in the industry, but everyone waited for the final rule, which came out in April of 2016. This rule is the one we all know about, widely criticized as unworkable, overly complex, and threatening to the industry, like existential crisis to the industry. If you remember back, the best interest contract, the BIC exemption, and then you had the financial institution requirements. So anyway, this was so bad that 4 lawsuits challenged this rule. In June of 2017, the rule partially went into effect, and the DOL actually implemented some delays there. But it was March of 2018 where the Fifth Circuit in Texas vacated the rule, which nullified the rule in its entirety. DOL back to the drawing board until December of 2020. This is the end of the Trump term, where they expanded the definition of fiduciary merely by interpretation, not necessarily a rule change, and then created the 2020-02 exemption, which largely dealt with independent or investment advisors. Insurance investors or investment advisors. Then we go to February of 2022, which is where the full compliance period existed. And this is where you've had to have a 8424 exemption for your rollovers. This is the world we're existing in now. Now, here we are. Halloween of last year, October 31st, there was a new proposal which redefined the definition of fiduciary and made some amendments to the prohibited transaction exemptions. And then here we are today, April of 2024. We've got the new rule. It's final. This is what it's going to be unless there's litigation. This is the world we're going to be existing under and what we're going to be talking about the rest of today. That was way longer than 60 seconds.
I'm going to give you 90 seconds on that. We've got, just as a quick reminder, we're going to jump, the next slide, we're going to jump into the big takeaways here. I do want to remind you, go ahead if you've got questions, type them in the chat. We'll get to them. If you're feeling bashful, remember, everybody sees those. If you're feeling bashful, there's a Q&A button. Only I see that. I'll be your proxy. Okay, Andrew, that was, let's call it 94 seconds.
Yeah, that was too long.
Let's talk about the big takeaway. So what do we got?
This is what you're here to see. So if you're a person who likes to take a picture of a computer screen when you do a webinar, this is the one you want to take a picture of. If you want to take a screenshot. So these are the big takeaways, and we'll revisit these. But essentially, it's who is a fiduciary has been expanded to include rollovers. So if you do a rollover, you are definitely a fiduciary. New fiduciaries will need an exemption to receive compensation, and your exemption pathway is the PTE 8424. To comply with 8424, you have to have 2 or more carriers. You have to abide by the impartial conduct standards, and you have to abide by the disclosure obligation. We'll get through all of this. We're going to dissect these into component parts. And then on the bottom part, which is not to be forgotten, the penalties for noncompliance for this rule are severe. We put fatal here. That's probably the right term.
Capital punishment for your business.
For your business.
Okay, but I want to back you up one thing there. So PTE 8424. So a lot of people that are listening to this are registered somewhere, IAR, or they're with a broker dealer. So they might be using the 8424, or might they be choosing the 2020-02?
They may be choosing 2020-02, and we'll get into the exemptions here in a moment. Okay. But they will likely be choosing 8424 going forward if you are a IAR somewhere.
Okay, so you mentioned we have the fiduciary has expanded. Let's talk about, we'll let everyone take a look at this, but the definition is expanded of who is a fiduciary. There's the new fiduciary test, but instead of us reading 6 bullet points there, break it down.
Yeah, so here's the rule. Here's the new definition of what a fiduciary is. And essentially what it really means to you is that if you're providing rollover advice, you are now a fiduciary. That is essentially what this means. Before, if you were providing rollover advice, you weren't considered a fiduciary because it was one-time advice. Now it's advice on the regular basis as part of your business.
Okay. All right. So then what does it mean? Let's just jump right to the next one. What does it mean to be a fiduciary? So we've got
that. Right. So you do a rollover, right? You do a rollover, and now you're a fiduciary. So you've got these different obligations. Number one is the duty of care and loyalty. You can only receive reasonable compensation, and then you need an exemption to receive that compensation. So those are the big component parts. We're going to dive into that in more detail, but those are the big things.
Okay. So then that takes us, I always find exemption such a odd word. But let's talk about the available exemptions.
So you've got 8424, which is now geared towards independent insurance agents. That is what really the only folks who can use 8424 are these independent insurance agents. 2020-02, you'll see this pop up a lot, but this is really going to only apply to investment advisor activity outside of the insurance space. So rollovers that happen in the investment advisory space.
And when we're talking rollovers, especially in the investment advisory space, I see a question that kind of falls into this. We're talking about into insurance products, or are we talking into wherever they take it?
Well, I mean, that's what we're talking about here today, is rolling over from a plan or from an IRA into an insurance product. And maybe it's in an IRA, maybe it's not. But Any kind of rollover, whatever it is, in the investment advisory space will likely fall under a 2020-02. That will be your pathway. But if you're doing it into an insurance product, 8424 is going to be your pathway.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little more in detail on 8424. So this is independent producers authorized. I'll catch these. You fact check me here. Authorized to sell annuities from 2 or more unrelated carriers. We've got the impartial conduct standards and disclosures. Break them down.
Yeah. So we'll hit the impartial conduct standards and disclosures in the next slides. But right now, and I'm sure most of the agents listening here are authorized to sell from more than one carrier. But if you're not, you need to go get another one to fit under 8424. So there may be a couple out there.
I would imagine most folks on here are truly independent, not maybe a captive Knights of Columbus, Thriving Financial, Allstate guy or gal. Most everybody on here would fall into this independent, but excuse me, very rare that somebody would just have one carrier. But let's jump over to those impartial conduct standards.
So we've got so now you've got two carriers, right?
Okay.
So you fit the first check mark. Now we're moving on to impartial conduct standards. The first two are the standards of care, the care obligation and loyalty obligation. The care obligation really is, did you do your homework with respect to investment objectives, risk tolerance, financial circumstances, and needs of your client? And you've got to show your work that you've tried to collect that information and that the recommendation fits those needs.
Yep.
The loyalty obligation is more a conflict of interest obligation, and you can't put the interest of yourself above the interest of the client. And essentially, the department tries to provide some examples here and definitional here, but essentially what they're saying is if you're, have two products, and product A is better for the client but pays you less, and product B is worse for the client but pays you more, and you choose product B, that would be a violation of the loyalty obligation. I don't think that the world works like that in the real world. Nothing like that is black and white.
No.
But essentially what they're wanting is document your recommendation to show why this product is good for the client. And there's nothing else that could potentially be better that wouldn't pay you more. So they want to see that type of work.
Now, who's the they?
The Department of Labor.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk. Let's jump to the next one. Then this is always. I see there's a quotations in this definition, but talk to us about reasonable comp.
Yeah, quote unquote reasonable. The biggest thing I want to point out here is that now all compensation is governed by the reasonableness standard. The compensation has to be reasonable. It's different from the proposal because in the proposal, you could only receive insurance commissions from the carrier. So that excluded a lot of things, any cash or non-cash comp from carriers or IMOs or marketing support and services. A lot of what we do here would have potentially been excluded, but that has changed. The department has walked back that obligation. So now all compensation that you receive is just governed by that reasonableness standard. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll get into that. That'll be a lot of outside counsel research and industry research on what they're really expecting on that reasonableness standard.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion, right now, I think largely compensation has all, since the 2016 rule, fallen into a range where I think we can probably say that the range that exists now are reasonable. But it's when you're 20, 30 years ago when comp was, high double digits, 20%, 15%, those days are gone.
There was much more variation.
Much more variation. I don't think that exists much anymore. But something we're going to keep an eye on and make sure no one falls outside of that and could run afoul.
That'll be interesting to see. And then the last one that's on here, I just think how can you be this is such a no-brainer to me. How can you be in business for any length of the time, but no materially misleading misstatements?
Yeah, you can't lie to your client. And that's obvious. There's a lot of duties that come at the state level for this as well. But, just know that this is for verbal and non-verbal communication or, put something in writing. You can do any of that stuff. But this really just becomes documenting your recommendations become very, very important. Documenting your meetings become very important. And then your advertising review becomes important, because you don't want to be dinged with a misleading statement in advertising and have it run afoul of this exemption.
So no, there's that word document again, right?
Yeah. And ultimately, with impartial conduct standards and the disclosures that we'll talk about coming up now, is you need a good third party. You need a good partner like CreativeOne to help you through this. Because if there's not someone there checking your work or guiding you through this, you could put yourself in danger. So, whether it's CreativeOne or whether it's someone else, find a good IMO, find a good third party to help you navigate this, because it's going to be, it's not necessarily overly burdensome as we read it now. It could be, but we've got to work on this together with the carriers to make sure it doesn't get out of hand.
Love it. Okay, just a reminder to everybody, please keep dropping those questions in there. We will get to them here at the end because they look fantastic. Charles, I just saw that. Nick, thank you. Sean, I agree. Okay, so we've got the 8424. Let's talk about the things that have to be in there. Fiduciary acknowledgement, written statement of care and loyalty obligation. What else do we need to know about that?
Yeah, so here's your disclosures. There's going to be 6 of them. So you'll see them indicated on the slides here, 1 through 6. So the first 2, I think, are fairly straightforward. They're going to be pre-written for you in terms of what you have to show to the client. So that's a fiduciary acknowledgement to say, hey, I am a fiduciary in this sale. And 2, a written statement of care and loyalty. If you go to the next slide, Dennis, the department has kindly drafted some model language for us. So you'll see this language pop up to satisfy those first 2 prongs of the disclosure obligation. So this language will likely show up in most documents, in most sales documents.
So boilerplate.
Well, yeah, that's what it's going to be.
Okay, so we've got that. So then you said there's 6 things. So boom, scope of relationship.
The rest of these are going to be pretty, we'll call it couture, need to be narrowly tailored towards your business. So you'll need a partner like CreativeOne to help you kind of craft these. So the first one is, you have to show the scope of the relationship and with the carrier, and then with the client as well. So you've got to show the fees and costs of the transaction, which, when in an annuity sale, there's not going to be a whole lot, but you've got to make sure to include that. But here's where the meat is that upon request, you've got to provide a reasonable estimate of your cash compensation, expressed as a range or as a percentage, and whether that compensation is one time or a trail. Big difference here from the proposal.
Yeah.
In the proposal, and even in the current 8424, you have to do that every time. In the proposal, you had to do it not only as a percentage, but in the actual dollar amount received in compensation. Now it's just upon request and expressed as a range or a percentage.
Okay, so only on request. Well, let's go back up then. If it's only on request, the bullet point above, we were talking about this off camera or offline. The fees and costs of the transaction indexed in a typical indexed annuity. I mean, there are no fees except maybe like rider fees. Is that what we're talking about?
Right. That would be what that would include. I mean, it's not translating exactly because they're taking this from sort of a securities perspective, and so there's not going to be a ton, and maybe in a different world there would be other fees, but that you've got to disclose those fees, and I think that, I mean, how they are currently, they're already disclosed, just maybe not in this format that they want it.
Yeah, and other documentation that we give clients,
right,
or prospects. Okay, and there it is at the bottom of the product disclosure.
Yeah, so this one is probably a big lift. This one, it may be a pretty burdensome lift. So you've got to disclose the types of products you can sell. Okay, you can sell fixed index annuities and what else you can sell. But you've also got to provide the carriers that you're authorized to sell and the specific products that you're authorized to sell within those carriers. So if you are authorized and licensed with a bunch of different carriers, that disclosure is going to be pretty significant. At CreativeOne, we are developing automating that for you, so you can provide that to your client, rather than you having to cobble that all together.
I can already, from our conversation when we were looking through the slides before we went on air, to now, I think I could already just about draw that thing out for you. And that one sounds awful. but actually it doesn't. Yeah, I can already see what it looks like in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a pretty big document, and I don't know a client that would like search through and say, "Oh, this carrier and this product, I want to ask you about that." I don't know if it's necessarily all that meaningful, but certainly something we can put together for you.
Okay, that's 3 out of 6. Let's talk about number 4.
So conflict of interest, it seems like this could be some boilerplate, but I don't think it will be. I think it will have to be narrowly tailored to your practice based on the types of compensation you receive, based on the type of business that you run. So this will have to be, created for you, with your help and maybe with some legal assistance in getting those conflicts adequately disclosed. Because I think people could probably run afoul of this rule pretty easily by not getting this part right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where you were saying this before. That is where having a good partner like CreativeOne is going to make a big difference here to make sure you can get that language right. Let's see here. That's 4. Let's talk 5 documents.
So 5 and 6 are really geared towards documenting your sales process, and so number 5 is documenting the basis for the annuity recommendation. And what they really want here is that you're documenting that you've fulfilled the care obligation and fulfilled the loyalty obligation. So, theoretically, you should already be documenting your recommendation through MDL 275, through the NEIC, but you're going to have to really show your work. Like this is the information I collected from the client. Mm-hmm. I determined that this was the best product, and here's why it's the best product.
So we're talking, this is also things like retirement analyzer. This is the homework portion. Why?
All of that would be very helpful.
Okay. And then as we move forward, we will see the carriers give a little more guidance as to what they want? ?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll certainly see that. It might be a little while, but yeah, they're certainly working on that. But you've got to provide that documentation to the client and the carrier. The carrier will take that documentation and determine whether the sale can go through or not. This is in addition to your suitability. So they're reviewing for suitability, but then they're also going to be reviewing for the DOL level of care, DOL standard for whether to approve that sale or not.
Okay. So I guess one of the big changes is that you've always had to document. Now you have to actually provide that. You've always had to do your homework. You've always had to document. And you should have been doing this whole time. But now you actually have to give your homework.
Yes.
All right, that's 5. So let's talk about number 6 then.
So number 6 is the rollover analysis. So this is a little different. This is a little new to this space. I do want to point out that it only applies to rollovers from ERISA and Title I plans, which is your 401ks. So this does not apply to your IRA to IRA rollovers. So what you've got to do here, and I'm going to talk about each of these 4 bullet points, but I'm going to really focus on one of them. So you've got to provide the alternatives to doing the rollover. You've got to provide the fees and expenses of the plan compared to the recommendation, the recommended annuity. And then you've got to provide who pays the administrative expenses and the different levels of fiduciary protection, services, and investments. I want to go to number 2. Number 2 is probably most difficult thing, is that you've got to go find that 401k's plan information, find their fees, and then disclose those fees compared to the annuity fees. The annuity fees aren't going to be a whole lot. I mean, it's probably every once in a while you got to put something in there, but you've got to go find those 401k fees. So that's interesting. That's not necessarily all that easy to find. Now, if you have a 401k, if you have a plan, if you're a plan administrator, you've got to file a document called a 5500, which theoretically contains all of that information. Some smaller plans don't have to do that. Some bigger plans are, it's not perfect. So at CreativeOne, we will have a tool that will allow you to automate that process. So if you have a client who works for Google, you'll be able to type in Google 401k, and it will populate that for you. And if that information is not available, it will provide benchmarking information that will satisfy this obligation. So we want to make this part as easy as possible for you because we want your sales process to be integrated. We want your sales process to be as seamless as possible. But this is new. This should be new to folks who are insurance-only agents who are existing on the insurance side. This side should not necessarily be as new to you if you're with an RIA. If you are an IAR, you've probably done this before. Yeah. But we want to make that process as easy as possible.
And the key thing here, we're talking rollovers from ERISA Title I plans, 401ks.
Yes.
Are we talking TSPs?
We'll get there. Maybe.
Okay. Okay. Let's so those are the six.
Those are the six. So those are your six big disclosure items that you have to do. Together we can do this. I think we can get there if we have to. There'll be some litigation, and I think that we'll put a strong foot forward there. And I think I believe in that. But if we reach the point of compliance, these are the six things you have to do in addition to the impartial conduct standards.
Love it. Just a reminder, we are going to hit some of these. There's some great questions in the chat. We'll get there here in just a second because we're only a couple slides out. Okay, so we've talked about what you as the independent advisor has to do, the independent agent. Let's talk about what the carriers are responsible for.
So I told you we weren't going to talk about the carriers, but I want to talk a little bit about the carrier role as it relates to you. So the carrier has to develop policies and procedures to ensure that you are following the impartial conduct standards and ensure that you're following the disclosure obligation. So you've got to provide that disclosure to the carrier. The carrier is going to review that to determine you've met your obligations. They also have to do a retrospective review, which means they're going to go over your cases from the previous year to make sure that you're not systematically violating the rule in one way or the other. So you're going to see more supervisory style analysis come from the carrier. May see a couple more questions here and there coming regarding business practices. So I expect those policies and procedures to be pretty robust. It'll be a long time before those come out and we'll have a chance to analyze those. But, to the extent we have any influence on that, we want those to be as uniform as possible across the industry, because complying with, if you're, licensed with 10 different carriers, complying with 10 different modes of compliance are pretty difficult. So we're going to, to the extent we have any influence, we're going to make sure that happens.
Perfect. Okay. So we've talked about the rule. We've talked about what you as a producer, advisor, agent have to do. We've talked what the carrier has to do. What happens if you don't?
It's pretty severe, Dennis. It's pretty severe. I wouldn't recommend it. We put on here, non-compliance will be fatal to your business. And let's get into that. If you are found to be in non-compliance, there is a potential that you could be barred from using the 8424 exemption for 10 years, which essentially would mean you can't do rollovers. That could likely be fatal to your business.
Yeah.
You can get into the merits of this rule and people can say one way or the other, but I think it's probably uniformly agreed that the penalties in this rule are draconian, are very severe. So if you don't think you're being compliant, now is the time to get ready for this, because this thing is coming. And if you're caught not being compliant, even from the carrier is almost tasked with being a policeman here. If the carrier finds it, and it could be very fatal to your business. So it's important to get caught up. And we'll talk about the timing here. There is some time to get there, but we probably got to start now.
I just, I think as these rules come into play, and with all the advisors that I've gotten to work with over the years here at Creative, one of the things that I've always seen is that if you're in business for a length of time, you're probably doing things right. Because if you're dancing in the gray area, you get it comes back to bite you, and it bites you hard.
I think this rule makes it less likely that anyone will ever be able to dance in the gray area.
Well, good.
Like that world is going away.
Good. Okay. So we've talked about what? We've talked history. We've talked what's coming. We've talked about the obligations. We've talked about what happens if you don't. Well, let's talk about when.
Okay, so the effective dates. Here we are. I want to just stress that this was a big relief, because in the proposal, they had mentioned that this rule would be effective 60 days after publication. So that puts us, if they went with that, this thing would be effective at the end of June.
Yikes.
Almost impossible to comply with. So what they did here is that they have a initial compliance date of September 23rd, 2024. And you've only got to comply with the impartial conduct standards and the fiduciary acknowledgement. So you'll see some changes to carrier paperwork, maybe some carrier analysis is required, but that's what you have to do by the end of the summer. Okay, so then the full compliance date is September 23rd, 2025. So the bulk of those disclosures will have to come into play in 2025. The policies and procedures from the carriers will come by 2025. So this will be, a 15-month period where we're gearing up with an initial gear up for the next 3 months to get ready for this initial compliance date. And then that full gear up, like I'd say the bulk of it would come in 15 months.
This feels so different from before. It feels like, I just don't remember feeling like we had as much clarity with this much time to get everything complied. Am I wrong?
Well, we were freaking out when we thought it was 60 days.
That's
like
true
it'd be impossible. So maybe I'm clouded with that anxiety that's been lifted a little bit, but I think I agree with you there.
Okay. All right. So let's hit the big takeaways. Let's do a revisit here. So
here we are. So the definition of fiduciary has expanded. If you do a rollover, you are a fiduciary. If you are a fiduciary, you will need an exemption to receive compensation. 8424 is your pathway if you are an independent insurance agent. And that includes if you're an IAR. If you're an IAR or a registered rep with a broker-dealer, you can use 8424. You'll want to use 8424. You'll have to have two or more.
We have a choice. I guess some IAR.
You would have a choice. You could use 2020-02.
Okay.
I don't know why anyone would choose that.
Gotcha.
So you would have to have two or more carriers. You have to abide by the impartial conduct standards and the disclosure obligation. And then most importantly, if you don't comply, it's very, very, very bad.
I think that's pretty straightforward. Okay. I'm very curious to see what happens with I want to go back one slide. I'm very curious. That is a lot of time. We've got a presidential election in here in the middle, right between the two Septembers there. But so it'll be interesting to see. But it doesn't seem, I guess, as bad as it could have been, huh?
I'm not going to say that. Okay. I'm not going to get into the merits of it, Dennis. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work on our end, a lot of work on the agent's end, and a lot of work on the carrier end. And so we all need to be working together to get to that, initial September 2024 date, and then the September 2025 date. We're going to be ready for it. We're going to be working with the carriers to make sure that everything is in line and that we can get there together. So work with a good partner like CreativeOne, and we'll get to the finish line.
All right, here we go. Now we are going to go into the questions. Are you ready?
Fire away.
Okay, just for clarification. So this is not for, this is for IRA rollovers, not for non-qualified business.
Correct. And I'm going to also say this. This rule, Dennis, was nearly 800 pages altogether. So we are still digesting.
Yep.
So there may be some detailed questions that are asked that we don't have answers to. We will try to get those answers to you if we need to.
I tell you what, I will throw in here with certainty. I'll say this. It doesn't matter if it's qualified or non-qualified. You should, of course, be documenting your obligations. You should be.
But yes, to answer that question,
yeah,
this is only about rollovers.
Yep. Okay. Going over. Let's see here. What do we got here? Somebody said, did you say we'll have a resource for getting the information listed in number 6? Number 6 was back to 401ks and such.
Yes, we will have that certainly by September 2025, but we're already working with partners on that now.
Yep. Another question someone said, so carrier paperwork will have this going forward, so it will be documented. They're not going to do anything until they have to, which would be September then, right?
Yeah, I think you probably see things start to roll out end of the summer to get folks ready for it. But certainly, with the fiduciary acknowledgement and then, some of that other items involved with the impartial conduct standards will be incorporated, likely be the end of the summer. But the rest of that will come a year after.
Your little more detailed question. Does this apply to MIGAs, multi-year guaranteed annuities, or just VAs and fixed indexed annuities only?
So this does not apply to VAs. So VAs will have to go the 2020-02 route.
Oh, good catch.
Right. So securities have to go, and that's what we're talking about in terms of that securities related stuff. That would have to go through 2020-02. MIGAs, this would apply to.
This would apply to. Somebody said 5500s are a year old at best. Will the most recent info be sufficient? I think you said
yes.
The answer is yes on that.
That's the best I can give you. I don't know where else the department wants you to find that information. There is information in the rule that information taken from third parties, theoretically, the 5500, you can take at face value. So the 5500 will be your best resource.
And best efforts. If you can't get the information, you can't get the information. You can't get the information. But there's going to be some great resources though to provide.
Right.
Let's see. That one went too fast. Let's see here. Will our, just a quick note, with this is being recorded, you will be able to get the information off there. Let's see, that was a commentary. Is it possible? Well, I don't know if you want to speculate on this one. Possible for there to be a change if the administration changes? I guess
I can talk about that to the best of my knowledge. So the department was in a mad scramble to get this thing done in this time period, because there's something that's called the Congressional Review Act. And the Congressional Review Act says that any kind of rule or agency creation like this can be unwound by a filibuster-proof resolution through Congress. So the filibuster-proof in the Senate within 150 legislative days. Now, I don't know what legislative days can really mean, because we don't know how many they're going to meet. But essentially, the smart folks in Washington said that if the department didn't have this rule out by June or July, there was a risk that it could be unwound by Congress. That risk is gone. I don't think that they're going to fit under the Congressional Review Act. That doesn't necessarily mean that Congress can't act. They would just need to overcome the 60 votes in the Senate. So to me, this likely says that legislative fix is unlikely, but not necessarily out of the question.
Gotcha. Question: Any direction or resource or training on how to decipher and read the 5500s to pull the appropriate information? I can answer that. That'll be yes. We'll be providing that. We've got a little time.
Yep. There's great resources out there that do this on the security side. This will be likely porting that securities tool over into the insurance space. So these tools exist. We just need to make them our own.
Like it. Okay. You're going to put your compliance hat on for this one here. Will there be any specific documentation required if there's a rollover to a brokerage account, and then from there, or to assets under management, and from there then to an FIA in less than 60 days?
I would imagine there would be. That's going to be in the carrier policies and procedures. And so when we see those, we'll have a better answer. But I would imagine that would still trigger the documentation that the carrier is going to want to see.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back up. A question, just a clarification. I'd love it if you hit the dates again. When does this rule take effect? When do advisors have to be compliant?
Okay. So the first, mini compliance date, it's maybe it's the impartial conduct standards and the fiduciary acknowledgement is September 23rd, 2024. That's this year. The full compliance date, September 23rd, 2025.
Okay, perfect. Okay, David Framey, I agree with your comment you wrote there. As long as you're doing right by the client, not a big deal. Assuming, of course, you're doing all the compliance parts too, though. You're doing your documentation. Let's see, going back up. Speculative question for you, Andrew. Do you think carriers are going to change comp?
I think it's less likely they do now. I think you may see some changes here and there on the margins, but if I had to speculate, and don't take my word for this, I think it's less likely that they do compared to the proposal. I think that they have much more latitude in their compensation structures under this rule compared to the proposal.
Perfect. Someone has I got a question here. Does C1 have or will some sort of, I don't know if I like the language, stay out of jail checklist? To keep as a guide, keep cases clean and tidy. Yeah,
that's coming. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Let's see. Question: what will happen to marketing dollars, incentive trips, things like that? I think you hit that.
Marketing dollars are permitted, specifically permitted under the rule, as long as it is still "quote unquote" reasonable. Incentive trips, I don't want to speculate too much. They do specifically say in the rule that incentive trips can exist as an educational basis. So maybe not an incentive trip, but an educational trip can exist. They do say that there needs to be reasonable guardrails around those trips. Your guess is as good as mine about what reasonable guardrails on those trips mean. But so you may see some changes to trips, but they do allow them. It's in the preamble to the rule. They do say that they are permitted as long as it doesn't doesn't defy the duty of loyalty and is still considered reasonable.
Perfect. Let's see if I can shorten this one down. Is there a no advice recommendation option with client acknowledgement if I don't want to advise rollovers at all?
Yes, there is. That's pretty difficult to do. Some carriers may not allow that, but some may. And this, I'm a pure salesman here. I'm not, I'm educational exemption. Like they want to buy this through me. I didn't recommend it to them. I didn't offer any retirement advice on this. That's going to be some hoops to jump through. We'll get there. But reach out in the future when we figure out what the policy or the carriers require for that with their policies and procedures.
Perfect. This may be our last question here. I'll look through and see if I missed any other ones. But as an independent agent, does the agent have to show the client at least 2 proposals instead of the one company proposal?
So what you're probably referring to is the regulation best interest, which is the SEC FINRA rule. So if you're under that, you have to provide a reasonable alternative or best reasonable alternative to your recommendation. That is not a requirement here. It could be beneficial. It could help state your case in terms of why I chose this product, but it is not required as part of the process. Okay. But interesting question. That is a requirement under Reg BI.
No, perfect. Okay, so with that being said, here's what we're going to do. This presentation is being recorded. This recording will be pushed out to everybody who was able to attend. We had a lot of folks that were not able to attend. We'll get that out to them. I'll wait. I'll give another 12 seconds for a question. I had one just pop in that we'll answer, but keep your ears open to and your eyes open to your email here at CreativeOne. We will make sure that you are kept up to date specifically on what you need to be doing to make sure that you and your practice are compliant, that you and your practice are protected, and that you and your practice are in business from now until the day you decide to sell your practice. But okay, last question, Andrew. To comply as a fiduciary, does an insurance agent have to be securities licensed?
No. You can still maintain your insurance-only status. And the rule recognizes the valuable services that insurance-only agents provide. You don't have to go get your 65. You don't have to go get your Series 7. You can do that. And so, Dennis, it's been great being here. It's always great to talk to you about this rule. It's something that is monumental for the industry, and it's going to be a big lift for everybody, assuming everything goes forward intact. CreativeOne, we're going to be engaged with this from all levels, whether it's litigation, whether it's compliance. Compliance is going to be our main focus to get you all ready for these 2 compliance timelines. And we're here to help. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'd like to talk to you one-on-one. And you've got one more question.
Yeah, I got one that popped in here just for clarity. So, and this actually 2 that just popped in now, doggone it. And they're good too. So the question that popped in here, and then we do have to wrap, but we're discussing, the question is, are we going to discuss the 2020-02 in this webinar? Or are we just talking 8424? We're really talking 84.
We're really talking 8424. But for the folks who want to know about 2020-02, it is almost identical. They have really made those 2 exemptions look very similar. A couple different distinctions. On 2020-02, the financial institution has to sign off as a fiduciary. So your RIA has to acknowledge that they are also a fiduciary and held to that standard and potentially held to that similar liability. And then there's a couple of disclosure things that are slight tweaks, but nothing of note. So, whereas before 2020-02 and 8424 were very different, now they're almost identical.
Perfect. And you might have some tweaks on the 2020-02 because your RIA may want some specific, maybe they want you to use their specific form.
Right.
Okay. All right. With that being said, everyone, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for really kind of investing some time in your business to stay in business. We will keep pushing information out. We have a resource page at creativeone.com/DOL. And like I said, we'll get a copy of this recording out, and then any breaking news on this, we will make sure that you are in the know. With that being said, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Andrew Payne, on behalf of CreativeOne, thank you for your time today, and we will see you later.